G'day athletes, Keith here. Welcome to the Tilted Athlete podcast. In the last episode, talked about one of the exercise goats, one of the greatest exercises of all time, being the push-up. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about another powerhouse exercise, another great exercise, the farmer's walk or the farmer's carry. But before we get started on this episode, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast. Please like the episode, share with people that you think might enjoy the podcast or get something out of it. And do all that cool stuff. It makes me um, feel that I've accomplished something when more and more people are listening to my podcast, when more and more people are subscribing, commenting. It kind of makes me realize I'm doing something worthwhile here. So, pop a comment in the box there. Um, Subscribe if you haven't already. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it really helps out. So let's crack on. So the farmer's walk or the farmer's carry, as it's sometimes called, both the same thing, just slightly different wording. Um, when most people think of it, they think of strongman competitions, those competitions where people lift up these huge heavy weights and walk with them. And, there's definitely competitions like that around. I've been in a couple myself, but this is also a very solid exercise to add to your workout routine. So in this episode, I'll be talking about what the farmer's walk is, how to do it, the benefits to you, and I'll talk at the end about a slight variation of this exercise that may be of value, that will be of value. If you listen to a lot of my podcast episodes, you've probably realised I'm not a big fan of lots of different variations, but there's a variation of this I'll talk about at the end that I see as being of great benefit. So let's start by talking about what the farmer's walk actually is. So a farmer's walk is quite simply picking something up that's heavy and walking with it. As the name farmer's walk suggests, it probably came about by farmers picking up heavy things and walking, picking up bales of hay, picking up buckets of feed, picking up heavy things and walking, hence the name farmer's walk. I don't know that for sure as a historical fact, but I would assume just by the name and knowing quite a few farmers that this is probably how it got its name. The farmer's walk is essentially a full body exercise. It's a powerhouse exercise that's using a lot of muscles, a lot of muscle groups, a lot of muscles, working from your feet up. Look, you're using all the muscles that you would normally use in a deadlift. So you're using your your hamstrings, using your glutes, you're using your lower back, you're using your quads, you're using your core, and that's just the lower half, and then like the upper half of your body, using your shoulders, using your traps for stabilization, using your forearms for grip strength. This is one of the great benefits of the farmer's walk is the grip strength. It's a great one for improving your grip. Even your biceps and triceps are coming in a little bit just to help stabilize the weight. Your shoulders are coming into play to hold this weight up. So when I say this is a powerhouse exercise, it's essentially working everything. This exercise is also great for endurance. So look, bang for buck, this exercise is a powerhouse. It's definitely one of the goats of the exercise world. and one that's quite often overlooked as kind of a novelty exercise or something that only strong men do in competitions. But this is a solid exercise that you I would highly recommend you add into your routine. Bang for buck, um, definitely worth it. If you compare the simplicity of the exercise to the benefit you get out of it, um, definitely like big bang for buck. And when I talk simplicity, I'm not talking about easy, I'm talking about simple. So simple in setup. Simplicity, I'm talking about logistically, setting up the exercise, the moving parts involved to actually do this as opposed to tough, hard exercise. So this shouldn't be easy to do, but it is a simple exercise to set up and to execute. So let's talk about the setup of the exercise, the equipment needed, and for this, like there's a wide variety of things you can use. You just need heavy things. You can get specific apparatus made for farmers walks or farmers carries. So there's things that you can actually buy. They're like kind of like a I guess like a shorter barbell with a bit of a handle. You put weights on either end and you have one in each hand. Um, you can use a hex bar. You can use dumbbells. You can use kettlebells. You can use two kegs of water that you buy from the supermarket. Um, you can use a suitcase. You can use anything heavy. Um, well, once again, if you're a farmer, you can use a couple of bales of hay or a couple of buckets. Um, in in competitions, I've seen various things used in competitions, from like tubes filled with concrete. Um, I've seen a couple of railway sleepers like stuck on with handles on them. I've seen all sorts of things being used. My preferred go-to is kettlebells. Um, the reason being that their handles are slightly higher than if you use dumbbells. But look, there's no end of things that you could use. You could even fill a couple of buckets up full of water. So having no equipment is really no excuse for not doing this exercise. There's so many things you can use for this. So now you've got your equipment. Let's talk about the setup and the execution of this exercise. So it's simply a matter of deadlifting the weight into position. So using correct deadlift techniques. So hinging at the hips, at the knees, keeping the back nice and flat, and then standing up with this weight and walking either a set distance for a set amount of time, a set amount of paces, or maybe even until you can no longer hold the weight. Um, and then deadlifting the weight um, back to the ground. So they refer the eccentric of the deadlift. So at the start, we have the concentric of the deadlift, where we're lifting up the weight. We go for a walk, and then at the end, we use eccentric part of the deadlift where we lower the weight to the ground. There is one exception where you would vary this technique. So you'd vary the end of the technique. Um, and I've briefly talked about it in the intro, is where you're doing a competition. So a competition where you're timed. So if you were to do like in a strongman event in the Highland Games, something like that, where you're actually timed to do a farmer's walk. It might be out and back. It might be like around a specific course. Um, Generally, you're timed to do this, so you try and do it in the least amount of time as possible. So when you come to the finish line, you you're at speed, so you're not kind of stopping and lowering under control, I do what's called, I call a dump and jump. So you cross the finish line and then kind of like drop the weight, kind of jump at the same time so you don't drop the weight on your feet. But that's the only exception where you wouldn't do the, the eccentric version of the deadlift or the eccentric portion of the deadlift when you finish the exercise. So in all other cases, um, good lowering technique. Make sure at the end of your course, at the end of however many steps or distance or time you're doing, you stop, set yourself up into the deadlift position and lower in the reverse of when you lift it up. So keeping it back nice and flat, hinging at the hip, hinging at the knee, and lowering that weight to the ground under control. In most cases, when you're walking with the weight, you'd be doing this slowly and under control, as you would with any weight strength exercise, with the exception, of course, if you were doing a competition where you're trying to get this done in the shortest amount of time. Obviously, you'd be running or walking very fast with this weight then, and and also if you're training for such an event, you'd want to go fast in your training as well. But generally speaking, in most cases, you want to do these steps slowly and controlled, slow, deliberate, and controlled. So to avoid confusion, I'll talk mainly about the exercise, the controlled exercise version of this of the farmer's walk. I'll, I'll actually go in towards the end of the episode and talk a bit about the competition because I actually love doing farmers carry competitive events. It's something I quite enjoy. It's a bit of a challenge. Um, if I'm ever at like a Highland Games or similar event, I'll have a crack at the farmers carry because I do enjoy it. But I'll talk about that towards the end. So there's no confusion. I want to talk mainly about the exercise of the farmer's carry. So deliberate, slow, making sure you're doing your correct deadlift up when you pick the weight up and the correct deadlift down when you put the weight down on the ground. So let's start with the picking up the weight. So I've got my two kettlebells um, side by side, waiting for me to come and pick them up. So what I'm doing is I'm approaching the kettlebells. If you want to use dumbbells, kegs of water, whatever you're using, you're approaching the weight and setting yourself up nice and safely. So your deadlift principles, you need your feet nice and close to the weight, okay? Don't have your feet too far away from the weight because you're going to bend your back as you lift the weight then. So nice and close. Your feet should be at least shoulder width apart. So, or at least as wide as the widest part of your body. Um, a little bit wider, preferably. But don't have your feet close together. This is a common thing that I find when people do pick things up, whether they're doing a squat, whether they're doing a deadlift, is a lot of people tend to have their feet too close together, and that's just asking for an injury. If your feet and knees are close together and you're trying to pick up a heavy weight, there's a good chance you're going to injure your knees or injure your lower back. So put your feet at a reasonable distance apart, as I said, at least shoulder width or at least as wide as part of your body. This is where some people tend to switch off in the setup. They don't think of this as a deadlift, so they go and bend their back or do something silly to pick this weight up. So make sure this is an exercise in itself. This is a deadlift. That's the first part of this exercise. So make sure your setup is correct for this exercise before you even start. Make sure your feet are nice and close to the weight. This is key. This is a lot of people try to stand too far back from the weight, and you're risking lower back injury, as you are like if you're picking up anything heavy. So if you're picking up something heavy, whether that's at the supermarket, the hardware store, a big rock in the back paddock, whatever, you want to get your feet as close as possible to this weight, because the further back your feet are from the weight, the more chance of injuring your back you have. And make sure that your feet are a decent distance apart, that they're not together, your knees aren't together. So get the position correct from the start before you even lift this weight. Once you've got yourself set up, it's a matter of lowering the body down to where you can grab the weight. So from here, same as in a deadlift, you'll hinge at the hip and at the knees at the same time. So hinging down, keeping the back nice and flat. I don't say straight, because when I say straight, people tend to like try to have their their back rigid in like a straight up and down position. Um, so our back has like natural angles that we work at. So if you try to keep your back vertical as you squatted or deadlift, it's not natural. So I say flat, making sure there's no curves, especially in the lower spine. So look at yourself in the mirror or have a good spotter check you out, make sure there's no like you're not kind of curving forward in the lower spine. That's probably one of the one of the common faults I see when people deadlift is they kind of like have this curve in the lower spine, which means when they lift, they'll be lifting with their back. And, this is obviously a another recipe for injury. So yeah, to make sure you're not lifting with your lower back, you're actually using your legs. Make sure you're hinging at the hips, hinging at the knees, and keeping that back flat. Lower yourself down until you reach the handles of the apparatus that you're using. So this is, as I said, I prefer using kettlebells rather than dumbbells, because I find dumbbells like a little bit too low. The handles of dumbbells are a little bit too low for this exercise. So kettlebells are kind of up a little bit higher. Um, because if you find yourself having to go too low, it's like an awkward position. It's not really a natural position trying to pick up something that's too low to the ground. You kind of want that nice little bit high. Um, yeah. So kettlebells, as I said, are my preferred go-to. Um, you can get like hex bars that they're like a barbell that have like a hexagonal shape and a handle on each side. They're quite good as well, because when you put an Olympic bar and Olympic plate, on either side, they're raised up at a nice height. The only issue I find with them is you're usually constricted to your pace. You have to step quite short because of the hexagonal shape in front of you. But whatever you've got, just work with it. If you do have dumbbells, if that's all you've got, and you find them they're a bit too low, maybe find a little bit of a block or something to put them up on. Just don't have something that's at like waist height, because you're missing half the exercise if you're not doing that deadlift at the start. So make sure you're actually having to do that deadlift to get to it. So once again, protecting your back as you lower, making sure it's the legs that are bending and not the back, hips hinging, back's nice and flat, and then you grab the handles of the weight. And from there, you simply stand up. So you grab the weight and stand up with the weight. Now we're standing up using our legs. So the reverse motion of when we went down, ensuring that we are lifting with our legs and our glutes and our hamstrings and not our lower back. So another little common fault here is people set themselves up perfectly, and then when they go to lift, they arch that lower back. So make sure your back is nice and flat. So don't be afraid to stick your bum out. Look in the mirror to make sure you've got this right, or get a good spotter to watch you. I've often found when I'm coaching people is when I'm trying to explain, I watch them, they're arching their back all the time, and I said, don't arch your back, flatten your back. And um, sometimes I need to actually take a picture of them and show them what they're doing, and then that kind of corrects them a bit because they realize then that they are arching their back when they're not realizing before. But if you do feel yourself lifting, if you feel most of the pressure on your lower back and you feel your legs aren't doing the work, then that's a good indication that your position is incorrect. So make sure you're doing this with lower weights to get the technique right before you start lifting heavy, because you will really injure yourself if you go to lift heavy and your technique isn't correct. So as you lift this weight, ensure that your arms are straight. So another common mistake I see is people trying to row the weight up with the elbows as they're standing up. So your arms are straight. This is not a row. A row like a barbell row or dumbbell row is a different exercise altogether. We're standing up with our legs, our arms, apart from just being like big grappling hooks. Our arms are not taking part in this lifting motion, so we're not bending our elbows to try to row the weight up. We're simply standing up with the weight. So from here, you're now in the standing position. You're standing up with the weight. You want to ensure that your shoulders are level, so you don't want to be slanting to one side or the other. Nice level shoulders. So use a mirror or once again a good spotter if you're not sure if your shoulders are level. And an interesting side note on that, not a side note, but a little personal story. So those of you that listen to a lot of my podcast episodes would know that I play bagpipes. A couple of years after I started playing, I noticed photos of myself playing, and I've got the pipes across my left shoulder, and I'd sort of be like leaning, like my shoulders weren't level. So after that, I made like a conscious effort of having level shoulders when I play bagpipes, and having a weight over one side and not the other. You tend to either let the weighted side drop down more, or you overcompensate and like have it higher than the other shoulder. So having those shoulders level is important. And when I talk about the variation that I mentioned earlier, this having level shoulders is going to come even more into play. Yeah, ensuring your shoulders are level, and also your shoulders aren't slouched forward. So bring your scapula back, bring your shoulder blades back together. Don't let your shoulders droop forward, okay? So your shoulders want to be holding this weight up and preventing you from drooping forward. So you may see people, that have been shopping and they're carrying shopping bags and their shoulders are kind of drooping forward. That's what you want to avoid. Bring those shoulders back. And also have your shoulders like hanging naturally like a coat hanger. Don't shrug. So you don't want to have them like shrugged up. Don't listen to like a shoulder shrug kind of exercise. Have them like hanging naturally. Um, elbows, elbows are straight, or you can have like a slight little bend in the elbows if you like to, but definitely not like really bent like you're doing a bicep curl or something. But you can have like, especially if you've got some kind of elbow injury that's going to hurt you. If you have your elbows straight, you might want to have a little bit of a kink in your elbows, but only slightly. So once we're in position with our chest out, shoulders back, we're not hunched forward, we're not shrugging. It's time to begin the walking phase. So from here, we simply walk, maintaining that posture, maintaining the upright position with our shoulders back. We're not slouching forward at the shoulders. We're not hunching, and we're walking. And you want to make these steps slow and deliberate. And you may have like a predetermined course that you're doing. It might be like, um, a lap around a basketball court or something. And I'm only saying that because I'm standing in front of a basketball court right now, so that's the first thing that came to mind. But it could be like, a predetermined track in your gym, or it could even be like you might decide a certain amount of steps or a certain amount of time, or you might even decide just to keep going until you can no longer hold the weight. Now, if you do have a predetermined um, time or distance or number of steps that you're doing this for, bear in mind, just like the principles of any strength exercise, you need to keep challenging yourself. So if you find that 30 seconds or 50 steps or whatever you're doing, if you're finding that becoming too easy, you're going to need to change something, either do more steps, more time, more weight, whatever. But yes, essentially like you're just walking for that amount of steps, that amount of time, or until you can't hold that weight any longer. Now, as we go on with this exercise, with the walk, we're tempted, especially if we're doing for a predetermined track or something, you'll be tempted to go faster just to get it over and done with. But the same principles apply to this as they do with any other weight training exercise, time under tension. So try to avoid that that temptation to make your steps faster. Try to slow these steps down, make them slow and deliberate. So that's the walking phase of the farmer's walk complete. Once you've got to the end of where you need to be, or you're prescribed an amount of steps, or even if you just can't hold the weight any longer, stop in the standing position. So this is key here. Don't try to put down the weight until you get into the standing position. Once you're in the standing position, you go into the lowering or eccentric phase of the deadlift, which is simply the reverse of the concentric phase, which is hinging at the hips, hinging at the knees, keeping the back nice and flat, and lowering the weight to the ground. Don't pay off this part. A lot of people, they get to the end, they're so relieved that it's over, that they can finally put the weight down, and they kind of switch off and they kind of bend their back as they're putting the weight down. Make sure you don't do that. Go through the complete eccentric phase of the deadlift, making sure it's your legs doing the work and not your lower back. Once you've done that, stand up, have a rest, rinse and repeat. Do it all over again. And that is the farmer's walk or the farmer's carry. As I said, simple in concept. Um, there's there's an abundance of different weights that you can use for this, whether it's a bucket of water, whether it's like anything heavy, you can you can use for this exercise. I'll just go through the key points to remember about this exercise. Firstly, setting yourself up correctly, so making sure your feet are nice and close to the weight before you lift the weight up. Um, go through the complete concentric phase of the deadlift before you even start to walk. So making sure your back's flat, making sure you're hinging at the hips, making sure your heels don't come up off the ground, and you make sure you're not pushing through your toes. Um, and standing up, making sure you're not pulling with the elbows. Standing up into the upright position before you begin the walk. Shoulders are back, they're not hunched forward, they're not shrugged. And as you walk, um, slow, deliberate paces, try not to speed up, so avoid the temptation to speed up as you get to the end of the track. And when you're finished um, the walking part of the exercise, make sure you're in upright position and you do the correct deadlift on the way down. So the correct eccentric version of the deadlift, making sure your back's nice and flat and you're hinging through your knees and hips. Now, as I mentioned towards the start of this episode, I'm going to talk about a slight variation on this exercise. As you know, if you listen to a few of my episodes, especially if you listen to the last one about push-ups, and I did do a whole other episode about um, exercise variations, whether they're worth it or not. So check that out if you like. But I'm not a big fan of a lot of exercise variations for a few reasons. Sometimes they're just complete nonsense. Sometimes the risk factor is not worth any perceived added benefit, or sometimes the difficulty factor or the complication factor just kind of like negates the value of what you're getting out of it. Some of them are like I call party tricks because they're kind of like a bit of a show off thing, but really achieve nothing. Check out my last episode on push-ups if you want to know my opinion on the one-handed push-up. Um, but yeah, if you've listened to a few of my episodes, you'd know I'm not a big fan of lots of variations. But there is one exception to this I want to talk about because there is big value in this one, and it's called the suitcase carry. So the suitcase carry is essentially where you're carrying the weight in one hand. Now this adds like a bit more of a difficulty level to this exercise because your core is engaged to keep your body like upright, to keep your posture in play. So we're not here to suitcase carry like a farmer's carry, I guess. It probably had obvious origins for the name. I kind of think about people carrying a heavy suitcase and they're kind of leaning to one side, struggling with that. So that could have been where the name came from. But the idea with this is you need to keep the shoulders level. So you could and keep your torso upright. So having a weight in one side and not the other, you're going to want to try to either let that weight drag you down or overcompensate and like have that other shoulder, the weighted shoulder higher than the other. So the challenge here is to keep your shoulders level, your torso upright. So your your core is coming into play even more with this one. Now, obviously, if you do this on one side, you also need to do it on the other side. Otherwise, for obvious reasons, you don't want to have like be strong on one side and not on the other side. So alternate. You might do your track or your certain number of steps or whatever, and then change hands. Everything else is exactly the same. The way you set yourself up, deadlift, walk nice and slowly, um, and then deadlift the weight down. The only difference is you have the weight in Only one hand. So your core is essentially working hard to keep you to keep you upright and to maintain that like nice spine or neutral spine position. Um, yeah, so it's just a bit of added core value to this. You may notice in the supermarket, and I keep mentioning this the supermarket because that's where I see a lot of these things, and now that I've mentioned it, you may notice them a lot too. But you often see someone with a heavy shopping bag in one hand, and they're kind of like this, that shoulders dragging down, and they're really struggling. It's essentially like adjusting your core so that your shoulders are level. So you could even do a suitcase carry that way. Next time you're shopping, just make sure your shoulders are level, and your core is engaged, so you're maintaining that posture. Um, as I mentioned before, when I first started playing bagpipes, I noticed a couple of pictures of myself with my shoulders uneven, so I made a point of working on that and correcting that. You could also do this with a different weight in each hand, so uneven weight. So you might have a bigger weight in one hand and then a smaller weight in the other hand. Once again, make sure that you do swap it around and do the opposite for your next set. So yeah, the suitcase carry definitely a variation that I am a fan of. One of the few variations that I am a fan of. And you could add these like towards the end of your farmer's carry workout. Um, just do a few sets of your farmer's carry, and then do a couple more sets of the suitcase carry. Now, when do you do this workout? Well, whenever really. Like I generally do it like a standalone farmer's carry workout, um, just because it kind of doesn't fit into any of my other strength sessions. But you could add it into a leg workout. You could add it into whatever. But generally, I do a standalone farmer's carry workout, because I usually multitask a bit too. So I do like a farmer's carry, and then I'm doing something else. Um, I often don't do these workouts at the gym, for a couple of reasons. Like often gyms don't have a lot of space to be walking around, to get in other people's way and stuff. So I tend to do these things, like outside or somewhere like that at home. But whatever you do, you can do these things wherever you like. If you've got access to a basketball court, which I am on right now, you can do it then. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Um, you can do it at the end of a leg workout if you like. You do it at if you're doing an upper body workout, but just want to add a little bit more leg stuff to it. It doesn't really matter. Just fit this into whatever workout plan that you have. So if I before I end this episode, as promised, I just want to talk about a bit about the competition, the competitive event the farmers carry. As mentioned, there's a couple of slight differences, and the main thing is speed and when you're putting down the weight at the end. And that's because most of these events are timed, so the fastest person around the track um, has is the winner. So you want to try and get this done as quickly as possible. I've done a few of these events over the years, and it's one I actually quite enjoy. And I've done these things, but some of the events have some like quite random things that we use. I've seen ones where they have railway sleepers with like a handle welded to it. I've seen like PVC tubes full of concrete, and the idea is you want to get around a set course as fast as you can. So it could be like a 4 point course where you're going, up, um, up across like a box kind of course, or it could be just an out and back. Could be like you run out to a certain point and then turn around the point and come back, or it could be just a straight out one. Um, I've done out and back ones. I've done like box ones around like a box course. They're all quite fun. Have a crack at it. It's definitely worth having a crack at. As I said, there's a couple of minor differences, but the one thing remains the same is how you pick up the weight. Make sure you're picking this up correctly, or you will hurt yourself. Um, and depending on when the timing starts for this, it might start when you pick up the weight. It might start um, when you cross the start line, but you should have time to pick the weight up correctly. So you should have time to set yourself up and pick the weight up correctly before you get going. So I think in the last one I did, you could set yourself up and have hands on the weight, but you weren't in a standing position. You couldn't get into standing position until you're told go, but um, make sure you've set yourself up correctly. And then from there, everything's the same except the speed. You're either walking fast or you're running. Um, Trying to get around this course as fast as you can. Um, the turns are a challenge, and there's different challenges. If it's an out and back course, you have to do a complete 180 turn, which is a challenge when you have two weights, especially if they're long weights, like the length of it definitely makes a difference. Um, I found that I think one of the ones I did was the weights were actually quite long, so I kind of had to like turn them in at the front to form kind of an arrow so they didn't like sway out as I went around the corner. Um, so the out and back ones are a bit of a challenge for the turn. Um, the ones that you go around a 45-degree angle, they're like a little bit easier on the turn, but you still need to have like it comes down a bit of practice. And then the last thing is like teaching the weight, as I said before, doing the dump and jump, um, because you kind of don't want to slow down as you're coming towards the end. So you're coming towards the end like at speed. So what I generally do, and this takes a bit of practice too, so because you don't want to drop this weight on your foot. So as you come across the finish line, and you kind of like let go of the weights and do this little jump. So you jump over the weights. Um, it's a bit of fun, but you make sure like that you're definitely still not bending that back. So you're making sure you're still upright when you drop the weights and you're doing this jump. Look, if you don't feel safe doing that, you can always, slow down, then stop, and then do your correct um, eccentric version of the deadlift. Just don't arch that back. If you're lowering it, if you're stopping and lowering it, make sure you're doing the correct lowering of the exercise. But look, I like that dump and jump. It's quite fun. I think I've mastered that technique over recent years. I come across a finish line at speed, um, drop the weight, and then jump over the weight. If you're going to do that, though, make sure you actually wait till you cross the finish line before you dump the weight, because if the weights land before the finish line, you're going to be disqualified because you haven't completed the course. So yeah, anyway, that's a bit of fun. If you ever get a chance, have a crack at it. You don't need to be a strong man. You don't, if you ever at a Highland gathering, they usually have things like this. Um, they have all the bagpipes playing and they have the strong man event going and there's lots of fun things to do. They have the caber toss, which is another fun event to have a crack at. But yeah, have a crack at the farmer's carry. Or the farmer's walk. It is a lot of fun. Anyway, guys, I actually thought that this episode would take a lot less time than my last one. I talked for nearly an hour about push-ups on my last episode, and I thought the farmer's carry, there's not much involved in it. It's probably going to take me 20 minutes, but I'm at the 45-minute mark now. So anyway, that's the episode. Thanks for listening. As usual, put comments in the comment box. Subscribe to the podcast. Share with people. I'm actually quite enjoying looking at where people are from. I look through the demographics, and it gives me a bit of insight on the listeners. Probably about more than half of my listeners are in the same age group as me, 45 to 59. And it's quite interesting to see what countries people are from. So the majority, probably about 63% of my listeners are from Australia, and then the next percentage, the next highest demographic is from the US. So there's probably about 25%, roughly 25%, and then there's like a mix of there's people from France, there's people from like Canada. I think there's a New Zealander in there somewhere. Quite a few different countries. So it's interesting to see where people are listening from. So thanks again for listening, guys, and I will talk to you on the next podcast episode. Bye.